My name is Tom Clendon and I am an online accountancy lecturer. And I'm proud to say that I have won a PQ award on 3 separate occasions. And here I am now delivering to you another Back to Basics video in conjunction with PQ magazine. And this Back to Basics is all about IAS 37 dealing with provisions. And if we start at the beginning, we need to know what a provision is. And a provision is a liability. It's an obligation. But what is special about provisions is that they are a liability of uncertain timing or amount. So there's an element of estimation around either how much you're going to have to pay or the amount that you're going to have to pay. Now, IAS 37 is actually quite strict as to when you can recognise a provision. It actually imposes 3 conditions, all of which have to be met before we can acknowledge in the financial statements, before we can recognise a provision as a liability. Now, the first of these is there has to be a present obligation. Now, it can be legal or it can be constructive because you've made a very serious promise, so there's an expectation. And this present obligation has to have arisen from something that's already happened, a past event. So if you dig a hole, if you are quarrying and you have said that you are going to fill in that hole, i.e. you're going to decommission the quarry, you do have a present obligation to do that if you've already dug the hole. If that's within the contract, that would be then the past event, which would be a legal obligation. But there are 2 other conditions. There has to be a probable outflow. There has to be, in other words, more likely than not, cash paid out. More likely than not, money will leave the organisation to settle the provision, to settle the obligation. And you need to know how much. If you've got absolutely no idea how much, you can't then do a debit and a credit. You can't recognise a provision. So, those are the 3 conditions that have to be present if you're going to recognise a provision. What I want to do is to show you some simple examples so that you can see the application of that definition. The company's being sued for 100 million. So there is a nice, reliable number. It is probable the company will lose the case. And we have to explain, we have to state what is the accounting treatment. Well, I think this is pretty black and white because all 3 criteria appear to have been met. There is a present legal obligation arising from a past event. We are being sued. We know that it's a probable outflow of money. It says so, probable, and we've got a number to it. So we will recognise this provision in full. We will recognise this liability in full, the full 100 million. And we'll charge it to the P&L. Even though we won't pay it until the future, we will charge it in this year's profit and loss, and we will recognise a liability in regard. And if you like your debits and credits, you're debiting the P&L and you're crediting the provision. That's the double entry. Let's have a look at another example. This time, the company has no legal obligation to make people redundant. It's decided of its own volition. There's no legal requirement, there's no contractual obligation that it has to make people redundant. It's made a detailed public announcement, so it hasn't done it yet. And these redundancies won't be incurred until next year. So it's in the future that we'll be paying out the 50 million. Are the 3 conditions met? Well, I would argue actually yes. because at present there is a constructive obligation. You've raised a valid expectation by the past event of making the announcement. It's a detailed announcement. It's a public announcement. You will lose face if you don't go through with it. You're not legally obliged to go through with it, but there is a constructive obligation because of that past event, because of the announcement that has taken place. If it was a secret, if it was a mere board decision, if it hadn't been made public, then there wouldn't be a constructive obligation. So what we have here is a probability that we're going to carry out that decision. We've got a reliable measure of the 50 million, as a number. So we recognize the provision. We recognize it in full. And once again, we're going to be effectively charging this to the profit and loss account. We're going to be, recognizing a liability in full for the 50 million. This is a back to basics video. I am making it simple. I am making sure you understand the key definition and how it is applied. If it wasn't probable, but it was only possible, you wouldn't be recognizing it. You would be making a disclosure in the notes only. Let's recap. In order to recognize a provision, 3 conditions must be met. There has to be a present obligation, legal or constructive, arising from a past event. There has to be a probable outflow of economic benefit, and it has to be capable of reliable measure. You can only recognize a provision if all 3 conditions are met. There is no cash outflow in respect of recognizing a provision. Okay? No cash outflow. No money changes hands. Oh, one last thing. In the 2 examples, we made a provision of 100 and we made a provision of 50. It's possible that if you were told that the obligation was going to be settled in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, the amount you would measure the obligation at would be slightly smaller because you would discount it. You would reflect the time value of money. It would be measured at present value if it was more than 1 year, if it was long term. My name is Tom Clendon, and I have enjoyed presenting this back to basics video for you in conjunction with PQ magazine in respect of ISA 37. Look out for some more.